who owns these forests? Who owns these natural resources? And when you look into the history of resource ownership in this country, it's a fascinating history, because traditionally Indian rulers were the owners of everything in their realm, in principle. In practice, the ruler would say, this forest I want for my shikar, that talab I want for my family's bathing, those fields I want to cultivate for the army's well-being, and the rest would be handed over to the communities. You manage them as if you own them, and just pay me a tribute at the end of the year. And communities actually did manage their resources. They used them as if they were their own, and they managed them, and they managed them pretty well. One, just to throw another fact at you, is that at the start of the 18th century, half of the world's economy was accounted for by two countries. Can you guess? China and India. We were an extremely rich country, which is why we were called Sone ki Chidiya. Now, all this changed when the British came here. They came here to make money, and very soon applied the British laws, one of which was the sovereign rights of the kings. And in the sovereign rights of the kings, they took over all the natural resources, the better natural resources. So the best forests went over to the crown, the rivers were handed over to the irrigation department, and pretty soon people got alienated from all these resources. What we did after independence was simply to adopt that model, to expand it, and to strengthen the government control on these resources. If we want to see growth take place, the 8 and 10% growth model that people are talking about, you cannot sustain it if your resource base is poor. You've got to have productive forests, you've got to have water in the rivers, and you've got to have productive land. Our land productivity is one of the lowest in the world. And that's again something that we can thank the British for, because they split up the resource management, which was at one point done in a comprehensive manner by the local panchayat. They looked after the forest, the same panchayat looked after the land and the river and your well-being. Now, there is a forest department, there's an irrigation department, these guys never talk to each other, the farmers don't know why the forests are important for farming. And even though a good farmer will tell you that, look, my farming requires water, it requires forests, it requires good grasslands, all right? But this is not well understood at the planner's level. I would argue that, we talk a lot about liberalization in this country, and we are very happy that the entrepreneurs, their economy got liberalized. But what about the rural economy? Why is that not being liberalized? We always talk about two sectors in the economic model. There's the public sector and there's the private sector. We seem to have forgotten that there is a community sector. The community can very well manage, organize these resources. And I say that based on successful experiences of several organizations across the country who have helped the communities to build their own institutions to manage the resources, and have done an excellent job in eliminating poverty in those pockets or in sustaining the environmental resource base. But then this requires, if you want to push this, it requires a different model of development. We want human development, and we want a sustainable environment. We want to see less conflict in our society. Can we make a new central thesis, which is growth with sustainability? It may mean less profits, but it leads to sustainability of your resource base. It doesn't create that kind of a bamboo famine that we had in the first place. But if we do these, then you also require to have a decentralized system of planning. You have to involve the local people in the planning process. You cannot just sit either in the state capital or at the national capital and set your planned agendas. Earlier, the resource distribution moved from the poor to the rich and from the rural areas to the urban areas. We need to have a system by which resource sharing is either done through employment or distributing the means of production. And we have to have a different relationship with the environment, which is harmonious and which builds on the diversity that nature has provided. Then I would come towards the end and say that at a personal level, what is required is for the middle classes of this country to play the historical role of the middle classes. The middle classes historically have been the arbiters between the rich and the poor. But in the last 30 years or so, the middle classes seem to have given up this role. We have suddenly found ourselves in a position where if we align ourselves with the rich, then our own aspirations get fulfilled very quickly, our rise is very quick, and we seem to have abandoned the poor. We need to renew that compact, the compact that was the basis of our independence struggle. And we need to press for the decentralization of these resources. We need to have the poor own the resources that are around them. Now, many people say, but won't that lead to chaos? Sure it will, you know, throw a stone in a still pond and there are ripples, but the ripples die out after a while. And I would urge you to think, tell me how many of you would really like the Ministry of Agriculture to take over the food production and be responsible for feeding you? How many of you would like that? No. Some people are already shaking their head, quite sure. Well, the same is true of our forests. Our forests are horribly underproductive. We need to get the forest department out of the forest. They have not been able to enhance productivity of our forests in the last 60 years. Why should we assume that they'll do any better in the next 60 years? You give them to the people, and I'll show you any number of examples around the country where people, when they have been given control of the forest, have managed to revive even wastelands. And therefore, I would urge that we think in these terms of liberalizing the natural resource base. And I can assure you that your 8 and 10% growth will probably shoot up, and many more people will share in that benefit.
Thank you so much, Ravi. I think Sanjeev, Ravi has prepared the ground for you, because this is the work that you have been doing, which is to question the very measure of progress, which has been the GDP. So over to you.
Thank you very much. And thanks to all of you and to the citizens of Peace for inviting me here this evening. And you're absolutely right. What I try to do in my work is to try and think about the frameworks, intellectual frameworks on which our society has been functions at various points in time. Successful societies, successful civilizations are those that continuously question those intellectual frameworks and hopefully improve on them over time.
Renew them in some way.
Renew them in some fashion. Now, one of the intellectual frameworks on which our current policy making around the world is based is the framework of GDP. Over the last 60 years or thereabouts after the Second World War, the world has increasingly absorbed this as becoming the key tool on which policy making is made, and countries like India itself has over time learned how to get this going. I mean, we are very proud in our newspapers and so on to talk about how we are growing at 9% and 8% and so on. So clearly, it is something, a benchmark against which we measure ourselves. But the question is, how good is this framework as a way of measuring human progress?